Today on the podcast, it's my dear friend, Dr. Marcus Collins. His new book, For the Culture, is out today. The power behind what we buy, what we do, and who we want to be. We're going to get into all of the things that went into this 3-year project, and it's finally out into the world. And I don't mind saying this as somebody who's worked in marketing for almost my entire life. This is probably one of the best marketing books I've ever read. Let's talk about it next. And as I said, my guest today, I am so honored to be able to do this on launch day. The good doctor, Marcus Collins. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well, my brother. Thanks so much for having me. I am stoked to be here with you.
So before we jump in, first of all, obviously, congratulations on the book being out today. But for people who might not know you as a first-time author, kind of give them the elevator pitch of how you and I got to be doing this interview at this very moment. Like, let's go all the way back to being an engineering student to first-time author. How to, condense that and tell them who you are.
So I'm a product of Detroit, born and raised in the city. Went into University of Michigan to study engineering because I thought I wanted to be an engineer until I realized that I didn't. Ended up going into the music industry. Did a startup that did pretty well until it didn't, as music ventures go. Went back to school to get my MBA. Went to go work at Apple doing partner marketing for iTunes, managed our relationship with Nike Sports Music. Ended up moving to New York, met a guy named Matthew Knowles who has a daughter named Beyonce Knowles. And he says, wait a minute, let me get this straight. You were an engineer, you started a music company, you have an MBA, you work at Apple, and you're Black. You don't exist. You're a unicorn. You're not real. I go, yes, I am. I'm a real thing. Says, well, you should run digital strategy for Beyonce. And I said, yes, sir, I should do that. So went and ran digital strategy for Beyonce before going into advertising. During that time, I was at a pure play social agency called Big Fuel that was acquired by Publicis. Went to work at an agency called Translation that was started by Jay-Z. And ironically, Jay-Z and his the person who led the agency, a guy named Steve Stout. And I found myself in the world of academia while also working in practice. Fast forward, worked spend time at Donor, now at Wieden+Kennedy, teaching at the University of Michigan as well, Ross School of Business, while also putting my first book in the world today. Whew, that was the fast forward version.
Which I love, so we can get to the meat of this, which is, I want to ask you about the process. You've been doing a whole bunch of content before the launch of the book, and one of the things that stood out to me is that this has been a 3-year process, which is very, very different than both your academic work and professional work, right? You know, when you're putting out assignments for your students, you get that feedback almost immediately, either how excited they are or not excited you are, you know, and when you guys are working on campaigns, they might be 6 months, but they're usually not 3 years. And so what has this process been like for you to actually have to slow down and wait?
It's been lonely. It's a lonely process. You know, actually, when I did my doctorate, I thought that was lonely, but I had a support system beyond like my friends and family. But I had a supervisor for my committee. I had a committee of people that I was constantly bumping ideas off of to get some feedback. But when you're writing a book, it's a long narrative, and you're constantly just putting pieces together, sort of like Tetris, trying to create something meaningful. And to bring someone in on one small part of the idea sort of loses context of the broader part. So I feel like I spent a lot of time writing this thing by myself, trying to figure out what I really wanted to say. And to your point, I mean, and interestingly, you know, you thrusted me into the world of content creation when it comes to making videos. That feedback is just so great that you get instantaneously. You know if a video is working or not, and then you can continue to iterate. But I didn't know my thing is working until 12 hours ago when it entered into the world. I mean, I got some feedback from the market, which was great, from early readers, endorsers, which made me feel really good. But it's, you know, you need more people to buy into it. So you don't really know. So it can be, it's scary. It's lonely. And you tend to sort of doubt yourself a lot throughout the entire process. But I can say, hand to God, that I feel really proud of what I put in the world. I think it's representative of my 20 plus years as a practitioner, my work as a scholar, what I teach as an academic, and sort of the book I wish I had in these major inflection points throughout my career.
And one of the things that I love about you as a human being is your humility. And I said this in the intro, so I'm going to say it to your face. You are underselling this book by a long shot. This is the best marketing book that's been put out. And you've known me for a long time. I read a lot. This is the best thing out there right now. So if you work in that space, it's brilliant. But the thing that I love about the book, and we can get into that in a second, is the way in which it does something that most other business books don't really focus on. They might touch on it, put a tentacle here or there, but you're really diving into how humans behave in the world so that marketers can market better and understand their consumers better at a time when the country is not really great about understanding one another and what they're for.
That's true. And I credit that to the multi hyphens that have made up my career, from being an engineer to being a musician to being a marketer to being a scholar. I look at the world like an engineer. I look at the world and I see systems, an ecosystem of things that collectively work together to create the world that manifests around us. So when I'm thinking about consumers, people, I think about the underlying physics that govern what they do. And the better we understand those mechanisms, the more empowered we become as practitioners to leverage those mechanisms to get people to adopt behavior, which is the core function of marketing. So I pull in those things that people who are a million times smarter than me have interrogated, negotiated, had their work replicated over decades. One would even argue centuries. Think about Emil Durkheim, for instance. Take that brilliance and put it into a frame that's more contemporary, that takes advantage of the technologies that we have today and all the cultural production around us and all its many fashions and forms, to make sense of how they all play together so that marketers can leverage this thinking into their work, but also we as citizens, as human beings, might be able to navigate the world with more agency. And it's not like marketing gobbledygook. It's not 1000% all theoretical, which theory is a really important thing. It's the marriage of the two. And those things have helped me put, the work that I'm most proud of in the world, like launching the Brooklynettes, launching the Maine American Music Festival for Budweiser, even most recently launching Google Pixel, real tone technology, right? So this is things that have spanned 20 plus 20 plus year time horizon that I think it provides a lot of evidence, points of proof that the thinking is not just theoretical, but it's applicable as well.
And I think one of the things that you do, I am a nerd for words, and specifically words that don't translate into English very well. There's no like analog. And one of those is a Hebrew word called midrash, which is the idea of like the white space in between the text of the Torah is where all the magic is. And that's seemingly what you're doing in this book, right? You're taking the theory and the practice, and then you're focusing on the Venn diagram of the magic that happens in the middle.
That's right. It's like in jazz music, it's the important part is what you don't play.
Yes.
It's the space between the notes that makes the music breathe, that gives the music life in really interesting ways. The way you can control silence is a really powerful thing. And for me, I'm looking at, let's not talk about like what makes an idea powerful, because there are a lot of many ways, a lot of things that add at that. But what makes an idea, a product, a message, a person, an institution, an organization, what actually gets people to move? And the better we understand that at a conceptual a conceptual place, then we can leverage it across many, many, many different contexts. I say in the book, like, it's not a marketing book, it's a people book. Because at the core, we're trying to get people to adopt behavior. So if you have a vested interest in getting people to move, this book's going to be very helpful in doing that.
You're doing a podcast, which I'll talk about in a second. You've done a ton of video content. You're doing a ton of interviews like we are right here. Why a book? Why was it important to actually do this in a book and not do this in any other medium?
Well, a few reasons. I think that a book scales in ways that is unique. Now, one may say, oh, millions of people can watch a video. Like, the social networking platforms allow things to propagate in really powerful ways. But there's a certain level of depth that you can get into in a book that you can't really explore in a smaller form like a video. Even filmmakers, they take what might be 5 hours worth of film and they truncate it down into 2 hours so that it's digestible, where people have much more tolerance for a longer book that allows you to explore things in great detail. And I think that to really get at the bottom of what we're talking about, this idea of culture as the most powerful, the most influential external force to human behavior, it requires great rigor, and it requires great depth. And I think that, I give talks all the time and I make videos, and I teach a 14-week course at the University of Michigan, well, many courses, University of Michigan, Raw School of Business. But even that doesn't allow me to get to the depth that I think that a book could. And the hope is that it creates a foundation that people can scaffold more thinking on. I mean, this is what academics do. We disseminate knowledge through prose, because through prose we can get to more exactness, so that the foundation that people build on is more concrete.
Please tell me that you've assigned your book to your class already.
Absolutely, absolutely. In the fall, everyone's reading For the Culture.
All right.
You better believe it.
So, like I said earlier, you've also started a podcast called For the Subculture, which you've also, oddly enough, been working on for 3 years. What was the impetus to that? Because episode 3 or 4 is from 2021. So you've obviously been working on this for a minute. What was the impetus to kind of make this an additive to the work that you're doing with For the Culture? This is now For the Subculture.
Right. So the idea For the Subculture is to be sort of chapter 2, or the next episode, or maybe it's the addendum. It's, to go back to biblical terms, it's the lost scrolls, if you will, of For the Culture, right? It's the apocrypha of For the Culture.
Ooh, a deep
So
cut. We're doing a deep cut here.
So you got For the Culture that really capsized this argument with great detail. But then the idea of For the Subculture, as this podcast I do with Wieden+Kennedy, where I run strategy, and the head of Karma Lab, well, he's now the global brand ambassador for Reddit, is that we basically kind of do like a culture safari. Probably not the best word to use, but an ethnography into these different subcultures, leveraging the principles from the book to explore the cultural characteristics, the conventions and expectations of these subcultures that we think we know, that we really probably don't know very well, be it sneakers, be it trading cards, like we did with Josh Luber. Today's episode, this is this we're recording this session here, as was with Jalen Rose, talk about basketball culture. And the idea is just that this space is just so vast and so deep that I could spend the rest of my life writing about it, exploring it, talking about it in all the many fashions that it happens. And I thought that it was just a really good, like, 1-2 punch to release the book this week in the podcast, last week in the podcast will continue to roll out, so people could see around us everywhere, like, everything is culturally informed. And the better we understand that, the better language we have to describe it, the more power we have to navigate it and bend it.
So I made this observation the other day with a friend of mine, and I was talking about, and you and I have actually talked about this too. I was talking about this loss of wonder. And I was pondering the idea of, if you're losing of your childlike wonder of seeing the world, if that might not be a catalyst to misunderstanding other cultures, or not being accepting to kind of welcome new cultures in. And I wonder, as somebody who's putting out a book called For the Culture, A, any merit to that? And B, if someone wants to be better at observing other cultures and kind of trying to understand them as opposed to opposing them, what are some things that I hate the word tips and tricks, so I'm not going to ask you that, but, like, what are some tactics and strategies they can use, which are like tips and tricks for marketers, that they could understand culture in a more profound way?
I mean, you're right. Like, it seems as though the older we get, we have a tendency to have much more plasticity around the way we perceive the world, that the world just feels more fixed because we've been so interpolated into the worldviews that we have adopted. The frames that we have used to shape the world has become so ingrained that it's hard for us to see kind of outside of it. And what it means for us, the not tips and tricks, is that we have to first start with the truth that our worldview is not an objective worldview. It is subjective. And we start there to say, oh, the way I see the world is valid because that's my experience, but my experience may not be Eric's experience. That doesn't make Eric's perspective wrong. It just makes it different, right? That's why For some, a cow is leather, for others, it's a deity, and for some, it's dinner. Which one's right? All three of them are right. Right. And the way we see the world is the way that we behave in the world. So if we start with the foundational understanding that our worldview is subjective and other people live by different meaning making systems that we call culture, start there. Go, okay, cool. So people are different, and that is valid. Their differences are valid. And if people see the world differently, then there is a world that exists that's beyond my own. So we should walk into experiences, walk into interactions with people, sort of like students. I mean, I stay in student posture all the time. Everyone I walk into, I'm the dumbest person in the room, and I'm just there to learn as much as I can. So ethnographers refer to this idea of you observe the strange, looking for the familiar. You go, oh, this is weird. Like Eric connects a lot of figurines. So that's probably not weird because I did that too. But let's just say, Eric tries a lot of weird concoctions of food. Like the weirdest thing, he's going to try it. And I may go like, oh, that's weird. Not for me. Right. But then I look at that and go, oh, his fascination with chocolate flavored toothpaste, I know it exists somewhere, it's just like my fascination for major seventh chords in a cappella music, right? Oh, the same sort of affinity he has to that is similar to the affinity I have for another thing. And while someone may look at that thing and go, that's crazy, I'm doing the same thing to Eric. So it means like, oh, okay, there is some familiar factors into what may seem strange. And in other cases, we have to find the strange in the familiar. That like I do these things and go, why do I do this? This is weird that we do this ritual. Why do we do this thing? And if we start interrogating it, then we start to get a better understanding of what are these invisible forces that we would call culture that have created conventions and expectations of what people like us do. And if we start from that place, a place of curiosity versus certainty, I think that will by very nature show up in the world a bit more empathetic and a bit more human.
You are on a bit of a rocket ride and have been that way for a number of years. And so I would be remiss if I was not pinning you down for a second to ask, how do you manage that, right? You're at Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. You're actually in New York for part of the week at Wieden+Kennedy and all of the other things that you're doing. And you're now launching a book, but you also are a family man. How does one balance on that tightrope and make sure that everybody gets part of the juggling that is that life skill that you've been working on?
Yeah, I'm still figuring that part out too. I think, I start with the fact that my wife is very supportive, and my children are supportive. I mean, the most thing I've realized is that I'm not like sharing me. I'm like they're sharing me with the world and with the agency and with the school and the students. So I'm very grateful for that. I think that what I found to be helpful is that what I do at Ross is exactly what I do at Wieden. This is what I do as an author, is what I do as a content creator, as a speaker. That what I study is what I teach, what I teach is what I do, and what I do is what I study. And these things are very cyclic in nature. They're incestuous in a lot of ways. So I never really feel like I'm like putting time here and putting time there. I'm kind of doing all the same thing and finding ways to allocate power to the right applications at the right time. Now, sometimes those apps may run at the same time, i.e. I have a class and there's a client meeting and I go, oh man, I'm gonna pull this off. And it is full of all the cortisol just dripping through my blood stream, and it's full of anxiety. But those things don't happen as often as they could. So I count that as a blessing. But more importantly, I just sort of I take it day by day, man. I just figured I count it all a blessing, that every little thing, because I remember a time when there wasn't a rocket ship, but as you say, that nothing was happening my way. So I figured I was going to just try everything I got while I got it, because who knows what tomorrow's going to bring. So try to die empty, and hopefully I do the best that I can each day, and no one's disappointed. And if they are, then we got to find a better way to reevaluate. But there's no like magic bullet to any of this.
Fair.
I wish there were.
Fair enough.
Someone figured it out, please let me know. But right now, I just go ham, man. I just like wherever I'm doing is like it's got my full attention. When I'm in the classroom, full attention. When I'm at Wieden, full attention. When my kids, full attention. And then church, full attention. I just try to be as plugged in so that the times that I'm there matter.
Now, Marcus, my job at MLive is to run around and tell some of the best stories of things happening in and around Michigan, which is, of course, why I reached out to you to do this. But I want to ask, because if people are listening to this podcast and seeing all the things that you're kind of involved in, their question should be, why does he stay? He could clearly go anywhere and do anything at this point. Why do you stay here in Michigan?
I am a product of this state. I'm a product of Detroit. I'm a product of Ann Arbor. Like, I'm Michigan made, baby. And I just feel like, I lived in New York for just shy of 8 years. And I always felt guilty, even though I came home once a month, every month, maybe missed a month here or there, but every month for those 7 to 8 years, I would come home to see my family, go to church and do the whole thing. But I always felt like I was robbing the city. I feel like I was robbing Detroit. I feel like I was robbing the state, that I was giving my gifts elsewhere. And I feel like I've gotten so much from being a Michigander. I mean, I wear it with pride, that I feel like I have an obligation. It's my reasonable service. I mean, we're pure Michigan, right? There's no place like us. And I imagine everyone feels the same way about where they're from, and they're totally right to do that. But Michigan just feels like it's its own sort of island in the world, where people who are from Detroit are Detroiters. People who are from Michigan are from Michigan. And there's a connection that exists there, whether you're UP, the west side of the state where you are, the southeast side of the state where I am, or even the center. And I just feel really grateful that I was able to grow up here, so much so that I moved my family from New York because I wanted my kids to grow up like this too.
All right, my friend, you've been in the trenches putting this book out into the world. So my last question for you today, you clearly, I'm going to guess, have not been able to read for fun for probably an eternity. Is there a book on your list that you can't wait to dive into and just read for fun at some point?
Man, I literally have like a ton of books that are stacked up right now that
But is there one that's calling to you? They're like, as soon as I get this thing out in the world, I can't wait to dive into this book.
You know what? There is one by a new colleague at Michigan through the communications department, Professor Powers. She has a book called about branding that I want to read. That's the one thing that's at the top of the list right now, because it's a critique on brands in an interesting way, but at the same time, in fashion of Marcus Collins, I'm thinking about what the next project will be too. So I'm starting to get the itch to look at things that are outside of branding, to explore for maybe the next book.
I have a pitch for you before I let you go. If you would like to put your Thor hammer behind talking about corporate culture, we would love your input.
I mean, God willing, the book does well, then maybe that's the second book, right, for the corporate culture.
My friend, always an honor to get to catch up with you. If people want to buy the book, do you have a preferred place they grab it from?
Anywhere where books are sold, whether it's online, like on Amazon, independent stores as well, on Kindle or on audiobooks as well. So wherever books are sold.
Wait. Did you read it? Please tell me you read it. Did you read it?
I did not read it.
Oh, who did it then?
I did. It's, you know what? So that deserves a bit of a story. My good friend.
While you're telling the story, I'm going to download the audiobook because I'm going to do that.
So my good friend who I grew up with, a gentleman by the name of Joel Stengel, we went to Golightly together, went to Cass together. He is now a very, very prominent actor. He's on the Showtime show called The Shy. Amazing speaking voice. He does voiceovers. And I tried to get him to do the book because it made all the sense in the world. But he was shooting, so we couldn't do it at the same time. So I picked a lineup of voices that I heard. There's a gentleman by the name of Carrie. And I was like, oh, this guy, his voice is really, he did it. And Carrie did a really good job. So I'm proud of it. It would have taken me like 2 weeks to do it because I'm a novice. They were like, carve out a month because this is a hard thing. And I was like, whew, I can't do. So,
I actually remember a long time ago, this was probably 10 years ago, watching Vaynerchuk do his first audiobook, and it was the same thing, like a uphill climb, one line at a time, 7 months later, and the book's out in the world. Marcus, congratulations on the launch, my friend. I cannot wait to have you back on and talk about book 2.
I'm grateful. Thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate you.